Our last storyteller today is from Norway. Uh, Angela Halvorsen Bogo, an amazing storyteller. I've heard her in the past. And today she is going to tell us another folk tale. So please welcome Angela. Angela, please introduce yourself and then tell us a story.
Hello, do you hear me okay? Great.
Yes, and Angela,
Yes.
we know you're not from Norway. We know you're in Norway.
In Norway.
That is correct. I was born in England and I've lived in Norway for the last 10 years, and I'm now a citizen of Norway and the UK. So I'm in Brit, you could say. And I want to just put something in the chat because then I will forget it afterwards. Don't look at it now, but I just want to do this so I don't have to think about it anymore. And that is just details about how you can kind of thing. Let me just do that now. La 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 la, like that. Okay, done. Okay, now I want to tell you a story that I first heard in England a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago. I heard this story, loved it straight away, and I thought I would share it with you. This version comes from Israel, from long ago. And as I've been telling the story, people are saying, oh, we have a version of that story in our culture. So you might know it from somewhere else. And first, one little line of introduction from the poet Rumi. A story is like the water you heat for your bath. It takes messages between the fire and your skin. It lets them meet and it cleans you. Once upon a time, there was a very rich man. He had so much money that he had grown bored with trying to find things to spend it on. Now, he had a lot of servants working for him. He had a big house. He had everything that money could buy. And one day in the winter time, he was sitting in front of his fire, doing nothing, when a servant came in with wood for the fire. And the servant was tending, and the man was watching him and thinking. Suddenly he said to the man, You, do you have a dream? Do you have something you've always wanted? And the man, well, he knew straight away, because he did have a possible dream. He and his wife dreamed all the time from this man, of not being servants anymore, of having their own piece of land and their own little house and their own cows and goats and chickens. And it was a wonderful dream, but impossible because they were very poor and they had always been servants for this man. Tell me, I know you're thinking about something. What's your dream? The servant said, well, my wife and I, we always dream of having our own place with our own cattle and our own goats and our own chickens and our own little place. The rich man said, maybe you could win it. What do you mean, sir? Said the servant. Well, I was looking at you and I was wondering about cold human beings can actually stand. Have you ever thought about it? The servant said, no, I've never thought about that, sir. But think, how much cold do you think you could stand? Especially if it was for your dream. And then that you had the servant's curiosity and attention, he said, mountain not far from here. If you could stay at the top of that mountain, let's say from sundown to sunset, without a fire, without clothes and without a fire, if you could do it, I'll give you your dream. I'll buy you your piece of land and your little house and your animals and everything. What about it? The man didn't quite know what to say, but he did say, I need to, because, you know, he and his wife, they spoke about everything and they made important decisions always together. Very well, said the man, go talk to your wife. So the servant went off and his wife, and he told her what the rich man had offered. And she said, there's a way to do it. Tell him yes. We'll figure it out. So the servant went back and agreed to the rich man's proposal that he would go to the top of the mountain with no clothes and no fire and stand the whole night there. Very good. Very good, said the rich man. So 2 servants who would be witnesses were sent with the man, and he was to travel with them all the way up the mountain. And then as the sun was going down, he was to take off all his clothes and stand completely without any protection from the cold there on the top of the mountain with no fire. And the servants at a distance with their own clothes and blankets, of course, would watch and see if he could do it. They set off. But just before they left the property, the wife ran out and she said to him, I know how we can do it. Do everything that he's said for you to do. But when it gets dark, bottom of the mountain, and I will be there and I will light a fire, and you can keep your eyes on that fire and you'll know that I'm there and you'll know that we're doing it together, and I'll help you and we'll do it and we'll get our piece of land and our animals, everything we've dreamed of. Let's do it. So when the sun went down that evening, the man found himself standing there on the top of the mountain and took off his layers of clothes and stood there and felt the cold. It was freezing. It was winter. But as it got dark, he looked down the mountain and he could see there this tiny flicker of light. And he knew that it was his wife, and he knew that they were doing it together. And so he stayed there. And all night long, he kept his eyes focused on the light. And she kept the fire going all through the night. So that in the morning, when the sun came up, he knew and she knew that they'd done it. Very stiffly, he put on his clothes, and he was so cold and so stiff, but his heart was full of fire and joy. He went back with the servants to the rich man's house. The rich man came out to see them coming back and said, "Did he do it? What happened?" The two men who'd been there to witness the whole thing said, "He did it. He did it. He stood there all night without a stitch of clothing and with no fire at all." "Well," said the rich man, I must say I'm very impressed. Very impressed. How did you do it? How did you manage to suffer such cold in the winter on the top of a mountain? I'd love to know how you did it." So the man, full of excitement and, and enthusiasm and joy, said, "Well, you see, my wife and I, we talked about it, and then she said she would go to the bottom of the mountain and she'd light a fire." And the rich man said, "Fire? Did you say fire? The agreement was no fire. You used fire." "But sir, I was at the top of the mountain. The fire was at the bottom of the mountain, a long way away. It was just a tiny bit." "We said no fire. You didn't do it without fire at all. Get back to work. You don't win anything. House and dreams and..." Man told his wife what happened. And she shook her head and said, "This doesn't finish here. This is not right. Let me think about it." The next day, she knew what to do. She said to him, "We will go to the king. We will go straight to the king and tell him everything that's happened." Now, in those days, anybody could take a complaint directly to the king. Maybe you had to stand in a long line and wait your turn, but you would be heard. So they went and stood in line, and King David, he was sitting on his throne. And in came the couple, and they stood before him and they told the story of what had happened with their master. And he listened. So then he sent for their master, he sent for the rich man, and he came and stood in front of the king, and he told his side of the story. And then the king, King David, he thought for a while and he said, "Well, it seems to me that the agreement was not to use any form of fire, and you did use fire, so..." And he sided with the rich man. And the couple were left really with nothing and now nowhere to go. There was no higher authority than the king. And they were very disheartened. And the wife was crying as they left the presence of the king. But then something interesting happened, because they met someone on their way out of the king's royal room. They met his son, Solomon. Now, you might have heard of the wisdom of Solomon. There are many stories about him, said to be one of the wisest men who ever lived in ancient times. And when he saw this couple leaving an audience with his father, he was curious about why they looked so dejected and why the woman was crying. So he asked them. So they told him the whole story. And he said to them, "Leave this with me." And they went home. Now, 3 days later, Solomon had an idea, and he invited all the most influential, the richest people in the country. He invited the rich man, he invited the couple who were the servants, and his father, the king, to a banquet. And they all came. And at the banquet, there were dancers to entertain people, and there were storytellers, perhaps, to amuse the people. And there were musicians of different kinds. But the only thing there was any food. Now, I don't know if this is okay where you come from, but in the Middle East and Israel at that time, to invite people to a banquet and not provide on the table even an olive was outrageously inappropriate. And people were whispering to one another, and no amount of dancing and storytelling and music could make up for the fact that this was unheard of, and people were uncomfortable. And the most uncomfortable person there was the king, who sat there confused and started to rage inside. And eventually he decided to storm into the kitchens and find out what on earth was going on with the food. Where was the banquet? And when he went in there, there was nobody. There were no servants cooking anything. There was no food to be seen. There was Solomon just leaning up against the wall with a smile on his face. And there at one end of the kitchen was the kitchen fire for roasting the meats. And right down at the other end of the kitchen, a long way from the fire, there was one boy who was turning a lamb that was completely raw on a spit. The king said to his son, "What are you doing? Where is the food?" Solomon said, "Father, there's no problem. It's there and the lamb is there." "What do you mean the fire's there and the lamb's there?" "Well, there's no problem," said Solomon, "because if a fire at the bottom of a mountain can warm a man at the top of the same mountain, then there'll be no problem for that fire to cook that meat." And David, King David, he realized that he had been wrong, badly wrong. So then he had to go out in front of all those important people in the land and say, I made a mistake. I apologize. Of course, you, pointing to the rich man, you must give this couple what you promised, because a fire at the bottom of a mountain can't warm a man on the top, can it? And then smiles broke out on the faces of the man and his wife, and they realized that Solomon had helped them, and indeed the rich man did everything that was promised. And so they ended up with their land, with a sweet little house of their own, and cattle and goats and chickens, and they lived happily and very grateful days. And I wonder, what is your dream? And I wonder what you would be willing to do in order for that dream to come to you. Thank you. Oh, it's very strange to finish the story with complete silence. That's very strange.
We were on mute, Angela. There was a lot of clapping here. One more time, please.
That's a bit better. You feel a bit lonely when there's no response.
Thank you so much. As you said, there are multiple variants of the story. In India, there's a very popular story. We know it as Birbal's Khichdi, which is a very, very similar story that we have here in India.
Great.
Okay. And anyone else with their reflections, comments, thoughts?
Or your dream. Tell us your dream and what you'd be
Angela, it
willing to
was
do for it.
amazing. It was amazing. I'm so mesmerized. I love the way you came nearer to the screen. You spoke with us with all the distance, still feeling so close. And the way you ended it with the question, that was like a knock, 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 knock. What's your dream? And how far are you willing to go to bring that dream into reality? Amazing. Loved it.
Thank you.
Angela, you have such a way about you of making a story become real. You know, we can see it, we can feel it. We know you're seeing it, we know you're feeling it. There's such a sense of reality to your storytelling. It's fantastic.
Thank you. Do you have a dream, Eric?
Oh, it's too boring. I'm trying to make a movie out of a screenplay I wrote.
Ah,
It will shoot in the forest, in the South Indian forest.
wow, lovely. For those of you in Europe, I'm doing a lot of things in Europe this year. Last year, I didn't do almost anything, but this year there's all sorts of things happening that are also parts of my dream from long, long ago, dream of about 35 years. And now this year it's actually happening. So the link that I put in the chat, you can click on there if you're interested.
So there are now full gatherings in person again?
Yeah. So I'm organizing a festival in June in the Netherlands, and different troubadour trips where you travel with me in different cities in Europe, in Ghent in Belgium, and there's also one in Wales, which is there's a magic valley in Wales that I've discovered, and that will be outdoors with campfires and a stargazing expert, and a lot of fun. And in Italy, a couple of things in Italy, and in Marrakesh in Morocco in September. So lots of places to meet and tell and play. Yeah. So I love the reference very strongly with that. Thank you, Tim. Tim and I were connected to the same circus school in Bristol decades ago.
Yeah, a wonderful training for life.
Absolutely.
And performance.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela and Tim and Tom and all the Chennai storytellers. We have this group in Chennai called Chennai Storytellers. There's, I don't know, 55 or 58 of us, and I hope next year the Chennai Storytellers play an even bigger role in this festival. Okay, and thank you so much to the British Council. I hope this lived up to our dream and plan.